Welcome back. We're in video segment 23, the first part of inclusion. This is about creating a fifth force or context of authentic relationships and efficient work without energizing unnecessary anger. It's a really interesting phenomenon. I've seen it over and over. When people feel under-included or excluded, they get angry and they act it out. It's destructive. I've seen it kill proposal teams. I've seen it in workshops. It's a really interesting aspect of the human condition. You can also read about my own personal experiences with this in my book. So it's really important to avoid excluding people either intentionally or unintentionally. And over-inclusion wastes time and energy, and the way it does this is you have too many meetings with too many participants or too many emails. And so what we're looking for is appropriate inclusion to give us this context. Here we are in our basic organizational structure. Now, let's just remember back briefly that the most important emotional need after you meet the needs for security and physiological needs is to feel appreciated. Interesting, the next is feeling included. And the organizing system speaks to us about interesting things. Both of our biggest needs are emotional. And of course, you already saw this in Maslow's needs hierarchy. Here's the need to feel included. We all need it without exception. I'm going to talk about a way we fail to relate with people. It's when we adopt personas, which are masks or roles that are who we think we should be rather than who we really are. These often arise in childhood. We don these personas to either gain affection or avoid pain. We make ourselves into caring people, friendly people, smart people, or disciplined people. I want to be clear, there are times when you need to put on a persona, like you wear a coat in a hostile environment. For example, during the so-called hearings for Hubble, I didn't go there in my full, authentic, vulnerable self. I would have been murdered by those people. I went there wearing a mask, my NASA director super competent mask that I'll show you later. So it's like a coat in the wintertime, but if you leave it on permanently, it'll have very destructive effect on your influence and your relationships. So here's a few that show up in later life. We'll look at some more of these. The greens tend to be caregivers, gurus, teachers. Yellows tend to be cheerleaders, nice guy and gal, entertainer or clown, another cheerleader. The blues tend to be intellectuals, super competents, wizards. My wife's term for this is smarty pants. And the oranges tend to be Mr. Director, General Rambo. I think if you pay a little attention, you'll see this all quite clearly. So the one thing that troubles people in workshops is they say, well, when I'm being a father or I'm doing this, am I in a persona or am I me? And here's the test. Are you fully authentic? If you're putting on a mask for a purpose, and it can be a little tricky to sort this out, you're in persona. If it's the real you, you're not. And the way you'll tell is whether you're in what we call heart connection with people, whether you're willing to show your human side, your vulnerability, and your sense of how you connect with people and how people feel included when they relate with you. I'm going to show you an example that is a person that was in a persona and took it off. This will probably be helpful to you. When I moved to Boulder, Colorado, I was very surprised to see in the front page of the local newspaper every day some blast against the university president. She's the first female president. This was most unfortunate that she had this experience. And I watched this hateful stuff come out every day for days on end. And I went to my undergraduate class, my favorite class, and said the president has a leadership problem and it'd be nice if we could help the first woman president succeed. So let's spend 2 or 3 classes talking about what advice we would give her. So I went and took the front pages of several newspapers and Xeroxed and handed them out to the students. And we talked together about actions she could take that would improve. We then wrote her a letter. I had the students come over to my house on Saturday afternoon. Almost everybody came. We used a posted process to organize our most important thoughts. I drafted the letter, and I and everyone signed it. So one of my students met the president at a social function, and he said, I'm from the class that sent you the letter, and she thanked him and said, why don't you come and speak to the class? And my students knew that they could do this. So but before she came, I was laboring under 2 misconceptions. One was that I wanted a permanent career in the business school at the university, and the second was that the president had something to do with it. I, again, had not understood the organization chart yet. I was back in the old model I was used to of the orange culture. So I said, you know, Dr. Albino, some of my students are going to have really great careers like yours, and some of them are going to, you know, suffer situations and criticisms like you have. And, you know, it'd really be helpful to them if you could just tell them what it's like to pick up, open your front door and pick up the newspaper and see what's in there about you every day. Would you be willing to be authentic with my students? And she said, sure. So and I said, by the way, I want you to know the students feel even more strongly than I do about your privacy. And anything you say in our classroom will stay there. It will not go anyplace else. But she comes to the classroom, I welcome her, and she's like, if you've ever seen this where someone like puts a tape in their head and just starts talking inauthentically. So she's going blah, 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 blah. Well, I'm watching this and I'm getting a little nervous because these are undergraduates and they're impatient. I'm looking around the room, they're tuning out. So I go up to her and I said, Dr. Albino, I said, do you remember we met in your office and I talked about the classroom is safe and could you be your authentic self here? And she looked at me and I sat back down. She starts blah, 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 blah. Well, now I'm getting a little worried because I taught my students the bullshit signal. And the bullshit signal is putting both fingers over your head like antenna and wobbling them. And the term comes from the idea of ants are rolling a piece of bullshit up a hill. And it gets loose and starts running down the hill. It's going to kill the other ants as it thunders down the hill. So they turn around and they make, look out for the bullshit sign. Well, what am I going to do if my students give the university president the bullshit sign? How am I going to explain this? This is looking like a real problem. So I interrupted her again, and I took a chance. I turned her toward me, and I put my hands on her arms gently. And I said, Dr. Albino, lose the mask. Please be real. The students need this from you. Can you please do this? She looks at me. Her expression changes. And she said, oh, what does it look like? What's it like when I pick up that newspaper every morning? Said, the truth is, it hurts like hell. She went on to talk for 45 minutes. Excuse me for a second. With the most authentic speech I've ever heard. I mean, I and every student was completely mesmerized. It was like we were in the presence of a greatness that I'd never seen before. Nobody budged. So class ends. Keep my agreements, end class on time. I get up, thank her and stop her and thank her and say, Dr. Albino, that was fantastic. Thank you for coming. So at that moment, she puts the tape back in her head, goes blah, 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 and leaves. Well, this is a class right before lunch, and it's undergraduates. And so the first time I dismissed class, the room has like 35 students in an amphitheater with 2 doors. The first time I stood in front of one of the doors, and I realized that 35 students going to lunch are going to drag me right down the hall. So instead, I got behind this table that was bolted to the floor, and dismissed class, and they'd both run out the 2 doors. So I got up and said, class dismissed. Nobody moved. 35 undergraduates sat there. I didn't know what to do. I sat back down. I waited a minute or so, stood back up, and said, what do you want to do? And they said, we want to talk about this. So we spent the next hour, because the classroom was empty. We didn't stop until someone else came for the classroom, talking about the transformation. Now, the magic moment here, I want you to see, is when she exposed her authentic self. She dropped the persona and told the truth about the pain, and that's what released her. A few months later, she was removed from office and left the university not long after. And I thought, what a shame. If she could have overcome her fear. And this, by the way, this was a persona she probably adopted early in childhood. I'm going to speculate she had a difficult childhood, seems likely, and developed this persona to avoid pain. A very moving example. Let's look at another one. Here we got the benefit of a movie. This is about a military guy. He's a famous fighter pilot, and he habituates his persona, and he wears it very effectively at work. He's one of the guys. He's a big, big troublemaker guy, but he treats his children like soldiers. And in the movie, you'll see a speech where he tells them to clean up the camp and their Meachums and whatnot. And so what's the price he pays for this? No authenticity, no vulnerability, no love, no joy. So you can watch the movie clip and watch this in action. So here's some roles that are common in our workshops. For the green personas, Mr. and Mrs. Conscience, reminding us of our values, healing, helping people feel better, ministering to them, guru, consoler, teacher. The yellows, closely related personality, of course, all about relationship, Mr. and Mrs. People person, cheerleader, nice guy, gal, clown, relationship mender. Over here in the blues, the personas tend to be super competence, genius, smarty pants, intellectual aggressor. Boy, I experience that with overdone blues when I do a workshop at a big university. The wizard, Mr. and Mrs. Authority figure, director, executive, Rambo, general, big shot. I watched a friend of mine made president of an aerospace company, and when he walked down the hall, he just looked so stiff. By the way, he only lasted 6 months because he lost his capacity to relate. But these are all common. I want you now to write a persona you use in your workbook on page 14. And does it serve you well? And in your small groups, you'll report out which the persona it was. If you can't find one, ask somebody that knows you which one you wear. This is great fun. Next thing we're going to do is an interview of your persona, not you the person, interview of your persona. So we'll pause here and take a break. Thank you for listening. Take care. Bye-bye.